started with a notification. Sitting in the dim light of our living room, scrolling aimlessly through Instagram, I saw it. My husband, Ethan, had liked another post from her. Jenna Brooks, the flawless, sun-kissed goddess with a following of millions and a feed that looked like a magazine cover come to life. Each photo she posted was a masterpiece. Her laughing on a pristine beach, sipping coffee in a Parisian cafe, or gazing over the edge of an infinity pool somewhere exotic. Every shot was a perfect blend of effortless beauty and curated perfection. I didn't think much of it at first. She was a public figure, someone everyone seemed to follow. But it wasn't just one like. It was dozens. And then there were the comments. Innocuous at first. Beautiful shot. Or, looks like an amazing trip. But they grew bolder. You look stunning, Jenna. You're glowing as always. My stomach twisted when I saw how often she responded to him with a coy, "Thanks." Ethan's smiling face was smiling. At first, I told myself it was harmless. She probably got thousands of comments daily. Ethan's couldn't possibly stand out. But the frequency gnawed at me. Every day it seemed like she had his attention. Every day he was investing energy into her world. A world so different from ours. We weren't sipping cocktails at sunset or jetting off to the Maldives. We were here in our modest suburban home, juggling work, chores, and the monotony of everyday life. I brought it up once. "You seem to really like Jenna's posts," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't even look up from his phone. "Everyone likes her posts. She's an influencer." I nodded, pretending to drop it, but I started noticing more. He spent hours scrolling through Instagram, always with that telltale smirk when her photos appeared. He started keeping his phone face down on the table and taking it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. It wasn't like him. Ethan had always been open, predictable, safe, until he wasn't. One evening I sat alone in bed, scrolling through Jenna's profile. There was something hypnotic about her. She had a way of making everything seem magical. But as I dug deeper into her posts, I began to see a pattern. Ethan's comments weren't just random. They were on every other photo. Always at odd hours. And then I saw it, one of her stories. A short video of a cocktail glass sliding across a bar toward someone. The angle was low, the lighting dim, but the hand that picked up the glass was unmistakably Ethan's. My chest tightened as the pieces clicked together. The caption read, "Such a fun night." She didn't tag anyone, but I didn't need her to. I knew that hand. I knew the way he held a glass, the way his fingers curled just so. I confronted him the next morning. "Ethan, are you seeing someone else?" He looked startled, almost offended. "What? No. Where is this coming from?" I didn't want to show him the story. I wanted him to confess. "Jenna Brooks," I said. "You've been spending a lot of time on her Instagram. Commenting. Liking. Are you talking to her?" He hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. "You're being paranoid," he said. His voice a mix of irritation and dismissal. "She's a public figure. It's not like I know her." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was all in my head, that I was imagining things. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Weeks passed, and his behavior grew more erratic. Late nights at work. Excuses to leave the house. Always glued to his phone. I couldn't take it anymore. One afternoon while he was in the shower, I unlocked his laptop. I hated myself for it, but I needed answers. It didn't take long to find them. There were emails. Dozens of them. Exchanges that started innocently enough. Her thanking him for his support, him complimenting her work. But they quickly became more personal. He told her about his life, his dreams, his frustrations. She responded with empathy, flirting just enough to keep him hooked. And then there were the photos. Not the glossy, curated ones from her feed, but private, candid shots. Her lounging in bed, her face free of makeup. Her smile more intimate, more real. I scrolled further and found the hotel receipts. Dates that matched the nights he claimed to be working late. Locations that coincided with her tour stops and event appearances. It was all there in black and white. When he came out of the shower, I was waiting for him, laptop open on the table. "What's this?" I asked, my voice trembling. His face drained of color. "Claire, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you've been having an affair with an Instagram model?" That you've been lying to me for months while you gallivanted across the country with her." He opened his mouth but no words came out. His silence was the final nail in the coffin. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood up, walked past him and started packing a bag. He followed me, pleading, apologizing, promising it didn't mean anything. But his words felt hollow. As I closed the door behind me, I realized something. Jenna Brooks might have had the perfect Instagram, but her life and Ethan's infatuation with her was just as fake as the filters she used. And me? I didn't need a glossy feed to know my worth. I drove aimlessly for hours, the weight of what I just uncovered pressing down on me like a lead blanket. My mind raced, looping through fragments of our life together. Our wedding day, the weekend spent painting our first house, the nights we stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. I couldn't reconcile those memories with the man who had been sneaking around with someone like Jenna Brooks. The betrayal was so sharp, so visceral, it felt like I'd been gutted. I finally pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered in and out of focus as I sat in the car, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I couldn't go to my parents, they'd ask too many questions. I couldn't face my friends, not yet. I wasn't ready for their pity or their outrage. Right now I just needed space to breathe, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. The room was as unremarkable as I felt. Beige walls, a scratchy bedspread, and the faint smell of stale cigarette smoke. I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew it was Ethan. I didn't want to hear his excuses, his desperate attempts to salvage whatever scraps of our marriage he thought he could save. Instead, I opened Instagram. Her profile was the first thing that popped up in my search history. My thumb hovered over the screen as I debated whether to keep looking or to delete the app altogether. But curiosity, or maybe masochism, won out. Her latest post was a picture of her at a vineyard, holding a glass of wine and flashing that perfect, carefree smile. The caption read, "Grateful for the little moments that make life sweet, wine glass sparkles." The comments were pouring in, thousands of them, praising her beauty, her charm, her lifestyle. And there, nestled among the adoration, was a comment from Ethan. "Beautiful setting, beautiful woman." I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I clicked on her stories, scrolling through the endless highlights of her glamorous life. She was everything I wasn't: effortlessly stunning, endlessly confident, and so damn untouchable. But then I saw it. A story from just a few hours ago. It was a boomerang video of her clinking glasses with someone, their faces out of frame. But the sleeve of the shirt on the arm that extended into the shot was all too familiar. It was the same shirt Ethan had worn to work that morning. I sat up, my heart pounding. How was it possible? I had left him at home just hours ago, shattered and begging for forgiveness. Yet here he was, with her. My mind reeled as I tried to piece together how quickly he must have gone from groveling at my feet to laughing with her over wine. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a slap in the face. The rage that boiled inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. I wasn't even sure who I was angrier at, him for his audacity or myself for letting it get this far. I wanted to scream, to cry, to storm into that vineyard and tear them both apart. But instead I stayed frozen on the bed, clutching my phone as if it were the only thing tethering me to reality. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, replaying everything in my head. The lies, the clues I had ignored. The way he had looked at her posts with a longing he hadn't shown for me in years. By morning I had made a decision. I wasn't going to let him or her control the narrative. If they wanted to parade their affair in the open, I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. I started by taking screenshots. Every comment, every email, every piece of evidence I had gathered over the past few weeks. I didn't have a plan yet, but I wanted to be ready. Then I called my best friend, Rachel. "Claire? Are you okay?" She answered, her voice groggy with sleep. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm not. Ethan's been cheating on me. With Jenna Brooks." There was a pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "The Instagram model?" "Yes," I said, my throat tightening. "And it's been going on for months." "Where are you?" she asked, her voice suddenly alert. "I'm coming to get you." I gave her the address of the motel, and within an hour she was there, wrapping me in a hug that finally broke the dam of my composure. I sobbed into her shoulder, letting out all the pain and anger I'd been holding inside. Rachel didn't ask questions or try to offer platitudes. She just listened as I poured out everything, from the first suspicious like to the damning story from the vineyard. When I was done, she handed me a cup of coffee and said, "We're going to figure this out, but first you need to take care of yourself. Screw Ethan, screw Jenna. You're better than both of them." Her words were a lifeline, pulling me out of the darkness. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of strength, a reminder that I wasn't as powerless as they had made me feel. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. The next steps came slowly. I reached out to a lawyer, began the process of separating our finances, and blocked Ethan on every platform. When he showed up at my door, begging for another chance, I didn't even let him inside. As for Jenna, I never confronted her directly. She thrived on attention, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had destroyed my marriage. But I did post something on my own Instagram, a picture of me smiling with Rachel holding a glass of wine. The caption read, "Grateful for the little moments that show you who really matters, wine glass sparkles." It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind myself, and anyone watching, that I was still standing. In the weeks that followed, I found a strange sense of freedom in starting over. I deleted most of my social media, cutting ties with the world that had once felt so important. I focused on rebuilding my life, piece by piece, finding joy in the simple things I had once overlooked. And though the pain of Ethan's betrayal still lingered, it no longer defined me. If Jenna's Instagram was a picture of perfection, then my life was a mosaic, messy, imperfect but real. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. As the days turned into weeks, I began to settle into my new reality, though it was far from easy. Everywhere I looked, there seemed to be reminders of Ethan. The chair he always sat in during breakfast, the spot on the couch where he'd fall asleep watching movies, the scent of his cologne lingering faintly in the closet even after I'd packed up his clothes and dumped them at his office without so much as a note. Each little reminder felt like a fresh wound, but I refused to let them break me. Rachel was a lifeline during those early days. She called daily, showed up unannounced with coffee or takeout, and kept me laughing through tears I hadn't even realized were falling. It was Rachel who convinced me to go out one Saturday, weeks after I had left Ethan. "You've been sitting in this house long enough," she said, tossing my phone onto the counter when I tried to argue. "You need to get out. Breathe some fresh air. Talk to real people who aren't Instagram influencers." I resisted at first, but eventually, I let her drag me to a small outdoor market downtown. The place was buzzing with life, vendors selling handmade jewelry, local artists displaying their work, food trucks wafting the smell of barbecue and freshly baked cookies into the air. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't anger or grief. I didn't buy much that day, but I did pick up a small ceramic planter shaped like a sunburst. It wasn't something I would have chosen before, but now it felt like a tiny promise of brighter days ahead. Still, moving forward wasn't a straight path. Late at night, when the world was quiet and my thoughts were loud, I found myself scrolling through Jenna's Instagram again. Her perfect life was still on full display. Beaches, designer clothes, exclusive events. Ethan was noticeably absent from her posts, though. Maybe their little fantasy had fizzled out now that the reality of what they'd done had set in. Or maybe they were just better at hiding it. Either way, I stopped torturing myself with her feed after a while, realizing that no amount of digging would give me the closure I was looking for. Instead, I started focusing on myself. I went back to yoga classes I'd abandoned years ago, took up painting even though I was terrible at it, and started volunteering at a local animal shelter on weekends. It was slow progress, but with each passing day, I felt a little stronger, a little more like the version of myself I'd lost somewhere along the way. Then one evening, as I was cleaning out an old box of photos, I came across an envelope I didn't recognize. It was stuffed between albums of our wedding and early vacations, almost as if it had been hidden on purpose. Curious, I opened it and found a stack of Polaroids from the early days of our relationship. There we were, young and laughing, Ethan's arms wrapped around me as we stood on a windswept beach. Another photo showed us sitting on the floor of our first apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes, sharing a pizza. I stared at those pictures for what felt like hours, trying to reconcile the man in them with the one who had betrayed me so deeply. The memories were bittersweet. They reminded me of what we had once been, what we had fought for and ultimately lost. But they also reminded me that I had loved deeply, that I had given my all to something that, for a time, had been beautiful. And while Ethan had broken that trust, he hadn't broken me. I packed the Polaroids back into the envelope and put them away in a drawer. Not to dwell on them, but as a reminder that I had the capacity to love again someday, someone who would value it, who wouldn't take it for granted. Life carried on. I found a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around Ethan or the shadow of his betrayal. I redecorated the house, swapping out the neutral tones he preferred for bright, bold colors that made me smile. I adopted a rescue dog, a scrappy little mutt named Milo, who became my constant companion and greatest source of joy. With every wag of his tail, it was as if he was reminding me that there was still so much good in the world, so much worth fighting for. Months later, I ran into Ethan at a coffee shop. He looked thinner, tired, like the weight of his decisions had finally caught up to him. He spotted me before I could slip out unnoticed and approached me with an awkward smile. "Claire," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "You look good." I nodded, not quite trusting myself to speak. There was a time when seeing him would have unraveled me, when I would have been desperate to ask him why he'd chosen her, why he'd thrown away everything we had. But now, standing there with Milo tugging at his leash, and the warmth of the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, I realized I didn't need answers anymore. "I hope you're doing well," I said finally, my voice steady. He opened his mouth as if to say more, but then he closed it, nodding instead. "You too." And that was it. No grand confrontation, no dramatic closure. Just two people who had once loved each other, now strangers on different paths. As I walked away, Milo trotting happily beside me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known I needed. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. The weeks that followed my brief encounter with Ethan felt lighter, as if seeing him again had released the last tether of my pain. I no longer spent my days replaying the past or wondering how things might have turned out differently. Instead, I leaned fully into my new life, discovering parts of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. Milo became my anchor, his boundless energy forcing me out of the house on days when I might have otherwise wallowed. We explored the local parks, where he'd tear through the grass, chasing sticks with a goofy determination that never failed to make me laugh. On one of those walks, I struck up a conversation with another dog owner, a man named Jacob. He had an aging golden retriever named Sadie and a smile that reached his eyes. At first, our conversations were casual, the kind of polite small talk that happens when two strangers meet repeatedly. But over time they grew deeper. He told me about his job as a landscape architect, his love for hiking, and how Sadie had been his constant through a difficult divorce. I found myself opening up to him too, sharing bits and pieces of my story, not the raw, ugly details, but enough for him to understand that I was still piecing myself back together. One evening after a long walk, Jacob asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. His tone was hesitant, as though he wasn't sure I'd say yes. But I did. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of excitement, the possibility of something new. Our coffee date turned into dinner, then another dinner, and before I knew it, we were seeing each other regularly. Jacob was nothing like Ethan. Where Ethan had been polished and charming, Jacob was steady and genuine. He didn't try to impress me with grand gestures or smooth words. He simply showed up time and time again, with kindness and patience that felt like a balm to my wounded heart. Still, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Milo was curled up at my feet, I'd wonder if I was ready to let someone in again. Trust didn't come easily anymore, and I worried that my scars might be too deep, my baggage too heavy. But Jacob never rushed me. He seemed to understand that healing wasn't linear, that it came in fits and starts. One evening, as we sat on my porch sipping wine, he asked me about the ceramic sunburst planter that sat on the table between us. I smiled, running my fingers over its smooth edges. "It's a reminder," I said, "that even after the darkest times, there's always a chance for light." He didn't press for more, but the way he looked at me with quiet understanding made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. As the months rolled on, I found myself growing, not just in my relationship with Jacob, but in the way I approached life. I started painting again, not caring that my work was far from perfect. I signed up for a photography class, finding joy in capturing the world through a new lens. I even began to reconnect with old friends, mending relationships that had frayed during the years I'd been consumed by my marriage. One day, as I was cleaning out the spare room to turn it into a small art studio, I came across the envelope of Polaroids I'd tucked away. For a moment I debated throwing them out, but something stopped me. Instead, I sat down and flipped through them again. This time, though, they didn't hurt the way they once had. They were just snapshots of a chapter that had ended, reminders of a life that had shaped me but no longer defined me. I placed the envelope in a box labeled Memories and tucked it into the back of the closet. It didn't feel like burying the past. It felt like letting it rest. The years that followed weren't without their challenges. Healing is never a straight line, and there were days when the ghosts of my past crept back in, whispering doubts and fears. But with each passing day, those whispers grew quieter, drowned out by the life I was building. Jacob and I eventually moved in together, merging our lives in a way that felt effortless. Milo and Sadie became inseparable, their friendship a mirror of the quiet, steady bond Jacob and I had formed. We spent our weekends hiking trails, hosting dinner parties, and dreaming about the future. Not in grand sweeping terms, but in the small meaningful ways that made each day feel full. Every now and then, I'd hear something about Ethan. A mutual friend mentioned he'd moved to another state, started a new job, and was dating someone new. I didn't feel the pang I once might have. Instead, I wished him well, genuinely hoping he'd found whatever it was he'd been searching for. As for Jenna, her star had faded. Her Instagram following had dwindled, and her posts no longer carried the same spark. It was a reminder that the perfection she projected was always fleeting, always an illusion. My life, by contrast, wasn't perfect. It was messy and unpredictable, full of unexpected turns and imperfect moments. But it was real and it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. As more years passed, the sharp edges of the past softened into a distant memory. My life took on a rhythm that felt organic, built around the things I truly valued, rather than the hollow pursuit of appearances that had defined so much of my time with Ethan. I rarely thought about him or Jenna anymore. They had become relics of another life, one I had long since left behind. Jacob and I eventually bought a small house together, a craftsman-style bungalow on a quiet street lined with oak trees. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it felt like home from the moment we stepped inside. The backyard had just enough space for a garden and a patio where we could sit on warm summer nights, sharing stories and dreams under the stars. Milo and Sadie loved it too, spending hours chasing each other through the grass or napping in the patches of sunlight that streamed through the windows. One evening, as we unpacked boxes in the kitchen, Jacob found an old journal of mine, tucked away in a stack of books I hadn't looked at in years. He held it up, raising an eyebrow. "This looks interesting." I laughed, reaching for it. "That's from another lifetime. Care to share?" he asked, handing it over without prying. I hesitated for a moment, flipping through the pages. Most of the entries were from the early days of my marriage to Ethan, hopeful, optimistic musings about the future we'd planned together. But there were darker entries too, filled with confusion and doubt as cracks began to form in our relationship. Reading them now, I felt a strange detachment, as if they'd been written by someone else entirely. "Maybe someday," I said, setting the journal aside. "But not tonight." Jacob nodded, sensing that it wasn't the right moment to dig deeper. That was one of the things I loved most about him, his ability to let me take the lead when it came to sharing my past. He never pushed, never demanded answers I wasn't ready to give. With him, I felt safe in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing. As the seasons changed, so did I. The pain of the past had been replaced with a quiet confidence, a sense of resilience that came from knowing I had weathered the worst and come out stronger. I threw myself into my art, experimenting with new techniques and styles that felt raw and authentic. I even started selling a few pieces at local markets, the same ones where Jacob and I had first met. Each time someone bought one of my paintings, I felt a surge of pride, not just for the work itself, but for the journey that had led me to create it. My friendships deepened too. Rachel remained a constant presence in my life, always there with her quick wit and unwavering support. We started a tradition of monthly dinners, where we'd catch up on each other's lives and laugh until our sides hurt. She'd recently started dating someone new, and watching her happiness blossom felt like a full-circle moment for both of us. We had been each other's anchors during some of the darkest times, and now we were both stepping into brighter futures. One day, while tending to the garden in our backyard, Jacob approached me with a small velvet box in his hand. My heart skipped a beat as he knelt down in the grass, Milo and Sadie circling him excitedly, as if they sensed the significance of the moment. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've brought so much light into my life, Claire. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, the kind that felt timeless and understated, just like him. Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, unable to find the words to express how much he meant to me. "Yes, I finally managed," my voice breaking. 1,000 times yes. The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning and anticipation, but in the best possible way. We decided on a small, intimate ceremony in the backyard of our home, surrounded by close friends and family. Milo and Sadie even had roles in the wedding, trotting down the aisle with matching flower crowns that had everyone smiling. When the day finally arrived, it was everything I had hoped for and more. Standing there with Jacob, under the canopy of oak trees that had become such a symbol of our life together, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. This wasn't the grand, showy wedding I'd once dreamed of, but it was perfect in its simplicity. It was real, just like us. As we exchanged vows, I caught a glimpse of Rachel in the front row, wiping away tears and mouthing the words, "You deserve this." And for the first time, I truly believed it. I deserved happiness, love, and a partner who cherished me for who I was, not the polished image of perfection I had once tried so hard to maintain. Life continued to evolve after that day. Jacob and I built a life together that was full of laughter, love, and shared dreams. We took road trips to national parks, adopted another dog to keep Milo and Sadie company, and spent quiet evenings on the patio, marveling at how far we had come. There were challenges, of course. Life is never without its hurdles, but we faced them together, with a strength that came from knowing we had already survived so much. Occasionally, I'd catch myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain, the heartbreak, the sense of loss, they had all been necessary steps in finding my way back to myself. Without them, I might never have had the courage to leave a life that wasn't serving me, to open my heart to the possibility of something better. In the end, it wasn't about Instagram likes or picture-perfect moments. It was about the messy, imperfect reality of living authentically, of embracing the highs and lows with an open heart. And as I looked around at the life I had built, I knew one thing for certain. It was beautiful, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. As the years unfolded, the life Jacob and I built together continued to evolve in ways I never could have anticipated. The love we shared wasn't just a bright, fleeting flame. It was steady and enduring, like the glow of embers on a winter night. It warmed every part of my life, filling spaces I hadn't even realized were empty. Our days were often simple, but they were rich with meaning. We didn't chase grand milestones or extravagant adventures. Instead, we found joy in the quiet moments. Slow mornings with coffee on the porch, impromptu dance parties in the kitchen while dinner simmered on the stove, the sound of Milo and Sadie's paws pattering across the hardwood floors. One autumn, as the leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, Jacob came to me with an idea that would change the course of our lives. He'd been offered a project designing a large park in a small town several hours away. It was the kind of project he'd dreamed of, an opportunity to leave a lasting mark on a community. But it meant uprooting our lives, leaving behind the home we'd spent years pouring our hearts into. "I don't want to do this without you," he said, his voice hesitant as though he feared what I might say. "But I also don't want to hold back from something I've always wanted to do." I sat with his words for a long moment, weighing the pros and cons. Leaving felt daunting, especially after all the effort I'd put into rebuilding my life here. But at the same time, I knew what it felt like to hold yourself back for the sake of someone else. I never wanted Jacob to feel that way, not even for a second. "We'll go," I said finally, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Let's see where this takes us." The move was both exhilarating and exhausting. We found a charming old farmhouse on the edge of town, with creaky floorboards and a sprawling yard that needed more work than either of us wanted to admit. The house became our new project, a labor of love that brought us even closer together. Jacob poured his energy into the park design, while I threw myself into turning the farmhouse into a home. I even started a small art studio in the barn out back, converting the dusty old space into a haven where I could paint and teach classes to the locals. The community welcomed us with open arms, and for the first time in years, I felt truly connected to the people around me. There was a sense of belonging here, a feeling that this was where we were meant to be. I became close with the women in town, forming friendships that felt as deep and unshakable as the roots of the oak trees surrounding our home. We traded stories, recipes, and advice, weaving ourselves into the fabric of this small but vibrant place. As time went on, Jacob and I began to talk about starting a family. It was a topic we danced around for years, never quite sure if it was the right time. But here, in this new chapter of our lives, it felt like the natural next step. The idea of raising children in this community, of watching them grow up surrounded by the beauty and simplicity of small-town life, filled me with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. When I found out I was pregnant, the joy was overwhelming. Jacob practically lifted me off my feet, spinning me around the kitchen as Milo barked excitedly at our feet. We spent the following months preparing for the baby's arrival, turning one of the farmhouse's spare rooms into a cozy nursery and dreaming about the kind of parents we wanted to be. The day our daughter Lily was born was the most transformative moment of my life. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt an indescribable mix of awe and love. She was perfect in every way, from her tiny fingers to the soft fuzz of hair on her head. In that moment, all the pain and heartbreak of the past seemed to dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. Parenthood was as challenging as it was beautiful. There were sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and moments when I doubted my ability to handle it all. But there were also first smiles, tiny giggles, and the feeling of Lily's small hand gripping mine as she took her first unsteady steps. Jacob was my rock through it all, his calm presence grounding me when the chaos threatened to overwhelm. As Lily grew, so did my sense of fulfillment. Watching her explore the world with wide-eyed wonder reminded me of the beauty in everyday moments. She loved to sit with me in the barn while I painted, her little hands smudged with colors as she tried to mimic my brushstrokes. "Look, Mommy," she'd say, holding up her latest masterpiece with a grin that lit up the room. Her joy was infectious, and I often found myself laughing alongside her, my heart fuller than I ever thought possible. Life wasn't perfect, it never is. There were still challenges, moments of doubt and fear. But they were overshadowed by the abundance of love and gratitude that filled our days. I no longer measured my worth by likes or comments on a screen. Instead, I found value in the connections I had built, the life I had created, and the love that surrounded me. One evening, as I stood in the yard watching Lily chase Milo and Sadie under a sky painted with the colors of sunset, I felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. Jacob came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist as we watched our daughter play. "We've come a long way," he said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "We have," I replied, leaning into him, "and I wouldn't change a thing." Looking back, I realized that my journey wasn't just about overcoming betrayal or finding love again. It was about rediscovering myself, about learning to embrace the messy, imperfect beauty of life. The path I had taken was winding and often difficult, but it had led me here, to a place of peace and happiness I never could have imagined. And for that, I was endlessly grateful. The years continued to pass, and the life we had built together unfolded in a series of quiet, meaningful moments. Lily grew into a spirited, curious child with an insatiable appetite for adventure. She loved nothing more than exploring the woods behind our farmhouse, her laughter ringing out like music as she chased after Milo and Sadie. Jacob and I often followed at a leisurely pace, holding hands and watching her discover the world with wide-eyed wonder. One day, as we walked along the edge of the forest, Lily turned to me with a question that caught me off guard. "Mommy, were you always happy?" she asked, tilting her head in that way children do when they're searching for something deeper than they understand. I paused, glancing at Jacob, who gave me a small nod of encouragement. "No, sweetheart," I said honestly. "There were times when I wasn't happy. Times when life felt really hard." She frowned, her small brow furrowing. "What did you do?" I knelt down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I kept going. I learned to look for the good even when it was hard to see. And I surrounded myself with people who loved me and helped me find my way." Lily seemed to consider this for a moment before smiling. Like Daddy and me? Exactly like you and Daddy, I said, pulling her into a hug. Her innocence and pure joy were constant reminders of how far I'd come, how much I'd grown since the days when I felt like my world had fallen apart. As the seasons changed, so did our lives. Jacob's work on the park was completed, and it became a cornerstone of the town. A place where families gathered for picnics, children played on the swings, and local artists displayed their creations at weekend markets. I often brought my own paintings there, setting up a small booth under the shade of the trees Jacob had carefully chosen and planted. It felt poetic, our work intertwined in a way that reflected the life we had built together. Lily loved to help me at the market, eagerly showing my paintings to anyone who passed by. "My mommy made this," she'd say proudly, her little voice brimming with excitement. Watching her light up with such genuine enthusiasm filled me with a pride I couldn't put into words. She was growing up surrounded by love and creativity, and I knew she would carry that with her no matter where life took her. Over time, I began to take on more ambitious projects. The barn-turned studio became a hub of activity, a space where I could lose myself in the process of creating. I started collaborating with other artists in the community, organizing workshops and exhibitions that brought people together. My art wasn't just a personal outlet anymore. It had become a way to connect with others, to share stories and inspire. One summer, I received an invitation to showcase my work at a gallery in the city. It was a significant milestone, one I hadn't dared to dream of years ago when I was still trying to piece my life back together. Jacob and Lily were my biggest cheerleaders, their support unwavering as I prepared for the show. On opening night, as I stood in the gallery surrounded by my paintings and the people who had come to see them, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just about the art, it was about everything it represented. Growth, resilience, hope. Jacob and Lily stood by my side, their presence grounding me in the moment. "We're so proud of you," Jacob whispered, his hand resting gently on my back. I smiled, blinking back tears. I couldn't have done any of this without him, without the steady love and encouragement he'd given me every step of the way. As Lily grew older, she began to develop her own passions. She had a natural talent for storytelling, weaving elaborate tales that captivated anyone who would listen. Jacob and I encouraged her creativity, filling her shelves with books and journals, giving her the tools she needed to bring her ideas to life. Watching her flourish was one of the greatest joys of my life. She was a reminder that even from the most difficult moments, something beautiful could emerge. Our family wasn't without its challenges. There were times when work was stressful, when parenthood felt overwhelming, when life threw us curveballs we hadn't anticipated. But we faced them together, leaning on each other in the way only a family can. Each struggle strengthened the bond between us, reinforcing the foundation we had worked so hard to build. On our 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised me with a trip back to the town where we had first met. We walked through the market where our story had begun, reminiscing about that first awkward conversation over our dogs. The vendors had changed and the stalls looked a little different, but the memory of that day was as vivid as ever. "I never imagined this is where we'd end up," Jacob said as we sat on a bench, watching the hustle and bustle around us. "Me neither," I admitted, my hand resting in his. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything." As we sat there, I realized how much my perspective had shifted over the years. Life had a way of surprising you, of taking you places you never thought you'd go. The heartbreak I'd endured, the pain I'd once thought would consume me, it had all been part of the journey that led me here. And here was exactly where I was meant to be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I leaned into Jacob, feeling the warmth of his presence beside me. This was the life I had dreamed of, not one of perfection, but one of depth, connection, and love. And as I watched the world around me, I felt a quiet, unshakable certainty that the best was still yet to come.